How's it going?
Going great.
Great. I'm glad to see you.
Nice to see you too, Shad.
This is the tough part of evaluation,
Yeah.
but the state requires us to do it, so we have to do it. I was just going to kind of remind you of our pre-conference that we set the goals for A5, which was to students consistently use assessment data to assess their own learning, determine learning goals, and monitor progress over time. And that, and you said your goal was to use that in your classroom. Is that? Why don't you start by telling me a little bit about your use of assessment?
Up until this point, and what I've been doing before this semester is I've been working with a sense of a tracker or a goal-setting worksheet where after a student would take a quiz, if they needed extra help on it or if they weren't quite understanding, they would identify the particular areas. Based on the quiz, they would use that to identify the areas that they had worked on and then use that to identify, okay, I'm going to work on it. And I'm actually still doing that, and that has some good success. But I'm actually, this semester, in the middle of taking it a little bit to the next step. And that is, I want students, my goal is for students to be able to take to be able to look at each learning target very specifically, broken down, and I actually break each learning target down into 3 to 4 success criteria. And my goal is for students to be able to, at the end of each day, self-assess them on what progress they're making on each particular success criteria. Where that has broken down, I guess, as for doing it this semester is a thing like that takes a lot of advanced kind of planning and putting together. And I feel like I've advanced planned my curriculum pretty well, but I don't have my assessments correlated very well to what the students are doing, so an assessment might do a really good job of getting the big picture of where they are. It's not broken down at this point to the small little minute details. So.
And we're going to try to determine those by unwrapping the.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about unwrapping, and that's actually where I realized I couldn't do A5 very effectively unless I really had the standard unwrapped and the students really knew from the beginning what those different things, and they had practice getting, because self-assessment, a student really does not know whether they can conjugate or not. They really don't have that, but if they can take an assessment and say, okay, on this assessment, I got this many out of this many, then they can say, okay, well, obviously, I'm not there yet on conjugation, or they can, and so they may feel super confident and not know them, or they may feel unconfident and they may actually, do that. And so I'm trying to help make a student's study time a little bit more worthwhile, so that they can actually study the things they need to work on rather than the things that they may have already mastered.
Right. Yeah. Sounds like you've read the book that we talked about, and
every page.
And you've studied a lot and done a lot of thinking about how you're going to have the kids self-assess their progress over time and making goals. I was just going to go over a little bit about some of the observations during some of my observations during your observation. Say that fast.
Yeah.
10 times. All right. Anyway, I noticed that there was why don't you tell me a little bit about the goal of the lesson?
The section you saw was a little interesting because we've been going through the film, one of the film versions of Les Miserables, classic French text, with the purpose of students going to be able to take the events that happen, write them down, and be able to retell what happened in French. Okay, so they're going to retell the story of that in written form. They're going to summarize what happened to Jean Valjean and everything else. So we're working little
It's
bits
kind
and
of an
pieces at a time.
analysis.
But today's lesson, and so that's the overall goal, is for them to be able to do a little bit of analysis, but also to create their own
Good, because I didn't
create
even
their
see
own
that.
story. So that's where it's going. But see, what you saw today was a necessary step. Basically, after we had watched the film, I wanted really to come up with another way of searing the information of what really went on in the film and some of the bigger themes of of Victor Hugo's work. I wanted them to really get a sense of the bigger themes and something like that. And so I showed them clips of music from the Broadway musical, just very different clips that touched on various different aspects of the themes that I wanted them to kind of to really get from that, just so that in the process of writing, this happened, and then this happened, and this happened, they don't lose what is the important part, which is some of the overall parts. And so I just felt like it was really important for them to understand that before they get caught up in the details of the project
Creative,
task.
yeah.
Because it is considered one of the master works of the really of the modern era of literature, and so I think it's just something that students really need to have a good grasp on the meanings of the story.
So how are you going to tie that into assessing, consistently use assessment data to assess their own learning and determine learning goals and monitor progress over time? What's your plan
To tie that into A5, to be absolutely honest, this particular piece of the unit is not very conducive to what we're doing with A5, simply because it's not super accessible. The second and English teachers will back me up on this, the second you try to get students to tell you about the theme of something, number one, you get a whole bunch of crap and BS, and number two, it loses the understanding. If they just, so I can't just assess them and say, what was the theme of this? What was this theme? What was that theme? So I can't assess them on whether they understood today. All right? What I can do is I can now, for the future, right, the ways that I'm planning on tying in A5 are I've broken down the past tense into several different aspects. The past tense is very complicated in French, and so I've broken down the past tense into what aspects of it students typically make a lot of mistakes on them, and I've designed, and you could see this tomorrow if you came in.
Right.
I've designed some interesting little ways for students to kind of assess themselves and see, okay, where am I on this particular there? So yeah, so in your observation, you didn't see a lot of it, and that's one of the reasons we do the post-observation conferences is to kind of talk about what I do, outside of what's the observable part.
And I put that in here. I said, oh, this is the pre-conference. On this, I noted that you had you gave the students an assessment of that they were going to look for two different types of past tense in the story. And did you ever have I would like to, in the future, see that data. That would help me kind of put together that, to back you up, that you are making progress on making goals and monitoring them over time. So in the future, you'll grade that. Walk me a little bit through the process you'll use so that you can help them evaluate themselves and monitor progress over time.
One of the tools I use is feedback, and I use some computer-assisted tools for instant feedback so that they can actually see, okay, these are the mistakes that I'm making consistently. These are the mistakes that I'm making a little bit more, over time. I'm working on actually tweaking the way I use Moodle to give a little bit better feedback so that they can actually write. But anyway, that's another story.
Interesting.
So anyway, I lost my train of thought.
How are you going to? You said you're going to use Moodle to track their and also, it didn't say use Quizlet. or-
Yeah, well, yeah,
The
I use
computer
different
parts
tools.
of
I
it.
use computer-aided things to help give students immediate feedback so they can kind of find out. And both Moodle and Quizlet do a decent job of aggregating their data and telling them, okay, you missed the questions based on this section, or you missed the questions on this quiz. You know, and it does an okay job. It's a tool with some limits, but that's beside the point. But it does allow students to kind of get a sense of what they've done. And then the other thing is for this one, they'll also get some partner feedback because they're going to be working with groups.
Okay.
And so they'll be working as a group of two trying to come up with this story. What that does is it gives them a little bit of support, gives them a little bit more help. And this is not actually on purpose, but the students almost kind of paired themselves in a kind of a high-low type thing. They were not at the same levels within their own groups, which was interesting. I have a lot of groups who I think one student stands to learn a lot from the other.
I'm just writing this down.
You're fine.
Because this helps me keep track of what you're actually doing. What I didn't see in the in the observation will be, this will help, so that when I come back, maybe you can invite me to come back and I could observe
Well,
some of
certainly.
this.
Certainly,
And,
make sure that next time you come, you will be invited to check out an excellent section of this.
And then some other things I noticed. Well, I saw the very good context. I saw the context for that, and then I just had a little bit of feedback. You had a very good, what looked like a good, concise target and success criteria, but it might help to have it written on the board. I noticed the one on there was a little bit out.
It's a little outdated. Yeah,
But you've
I'm
been doing it.
notoriously bad at that.
You've been doing
I
it,
am
though. I can
notoriously
see
bad
that.
at keeping that up to date, and in this case, it's definitely
And
where it
then
is.
you assigned an activity that would be accessible and would be able to, the students would be able to collect data and analyze that data but I would like to see that in a future time. You made it clear how the students would use the data to assess their own learning. They would. So that was, it's all right there. We just need to kind of see it a little bit more.
I agree.
And I gave you a proficient mark on the rubric because I felt like you're frequently, the difference is basically frequently or consistently.
Right.
And the way I would define consistently means that, once a week, as opposed to frequently, which means, you're meeting with them once a unit or about every other week, is the way the rubric defines that. And then I would just like to see what you're going to do with that data yourself and how you're going to adapt your instruction to deal with students that aren't. How would you do that? That'll be my last question. To see the data and adapt your instruction so that you can.
Well, one thing, as we
help
talked
the
a little bit
students that are
about
struggling.
in our most recent meeting that I think is going to help is as I set up different activities that are focused on different areas of instruction. I really like, because students have the natural, are being taught, I guess, that they don't naturally do it. They're being taught right now to be able to self-assess. That's one of the skills that they're learning, and you know this, it's throughout the high school. Students are learning how to self-assess. And I think there is something to be said if students can self-assess and find out exactly where they are. As I set up different groups and rotations, I'm going to give them the power to kind of choose which group, which rotation they feel like, or which activity they feel like they want to work on first, they want to work on best. All right, and so that will, by giving students the choice, I can see kind of where they are, and I can even ask them questions like, well, is this backed up by your data? Why did you choose group A that's working on conjugation? I haven't seen you screw up conjugation since you started. So why did you choose that group? Why don't you choose a different group that maybe something that you've had a little more difficulty with? And so I'll be the final kind of arbiter of what particular things they need to work on. But it was nice, I think, to give that selection a little bit more to the students, because then they take a little more ownership of their own learning, and feel like they're a little more self-efficacy with control over the process. 'Cause I think some students they just slide through school. I mean, they want to check whatever boxes they can, and just they don't really want to take control and really focus on that. They just don't seem to have that kind of drive. So I want to try to help students gain those skills and more self-efficacy that way.
Well, it's been a pleasure evaluating
The
you
pleasure is
and
mine.
I said I'd like to see evidence of creation, but you've told me how they're going to create in the future, so I'll document that on here.
In fact, the whole unit on the past is really focused on them creating these documents, creating ways to narrate their own past. Now, I'm not giving them sentences that says, "Hey, how do you do this?" or "Hey, fill in this blank." I mean, those are kind of low-level things, and I've been doing that, as just kind of formative little assessments, that says, okay, whether they can know it. But really, the goal is I want them to really be able to talk about and narrate that past.
Good.
At least within the passé composé, which is the equivalent of the preterite tense. The imperfect tense is coming after Thanksgiving, and we're going to start tackling that and its relationship with the preterite or the passé composé. It should be interesting.
Well, I hope you continue to improve, and thank you very much.
You're welcome. Chad's awesome.